From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket, Beach Blanket Fort Bingo, Fort Bingo. Spazzy's got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach Blanket, Beach Blanket Fort Bingo, Fort Bingo. Art and music on the zoo and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve SCHNEE, and welcome to Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. On this episode, I'm joined by my friend and frequent co-host and star of stage and screen, Ronnie Barnett. Today, we'll be chatting with the enormously talented singer-songwriter STEVE WYNN about his brand new box set, Decade. Everybody show your box that has it. This has just been released by Real Gone Music.
I don't have it. Of all people, I don't have it.
Well,
You should get it, Steve. It's good. It's quite good.
Now, this box set features 7 albums spread over 11 CDs. That's 166 songs, 57 of them previously unreleased. Joining us is Pat Thomas, the man who helped Steve compile the box and most definitely deserves our eternal gratitude. Welcome to the Blanket Fort, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hey, nice to be here.
When did the idea of the box set come about? And did you originally plan the albums as individual remasters, or was the original idea to do the box set?
You know, I've been asking this question a lot lately. I want to hear Pat answer because he might have a different answer than I did, and then I'll go from there.
Steve and I are in contact a lot, both personally and professionally. And so I was probably one of the first people Steve told that he was baking all of his old tapes.
Mhm.
Tapes get
Right.
fragile. He was digitizing, and I don't know if it was me or him, but somehow we were like, hey, let's start listening to this stuff. In my mind, it was a box set pretty much out of the gate, from my memory. But it was really about us listening to all those hours and hours of stuff. Needless to say, I wanted in right from the beginning. And, I was already starting to think about, how cool it would be and who should put it out and all that stuff.
So, Steve, was the process enlightening? I mean, were you stumbling across certain recordings or songs that you had forgotten about?
Yeah, I mean, what had happened was a couple of years ago, I came across a box of cassettes and DATs and a lot of recordings I kind of had forgotten about. And, at this point, when you have those old formats, you don't have ways of playing them. I don't have a cassette player anymore. I definitely don't have a DAT player at this point. So I wanted to get them transferred, and I'd run into an old friend, Steve Rosenthal, who ran the Magic Shop for a long time. The Magic Shop was a studio in New York City, down in the Village, kind of a legendary place, and a place where I made 3 of the records that are on this box set.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve had closed down the Magic Shop a few years ago, and he told me when I ran into him walking in the city one day that he had started a new business where he was transferring people's archives. And at the time I saw him, he was actually working on the Lou Reed archives for Laurie Anderson. She just brought him all of Lou's stuff to transfer for keepsake, but also for the New York Public Library, which has an exhibit that I want to take Pat to next time he's in New York. I've been telling him about that. But anyway, so that got me thinking, man, he's the right guy for it. And Steve came over and just to my place, and I gave him just boxes and boxes of every kind of tape I had. So here you go. Good luck with it. It took him about 6 months to transfer it all, to digitize the whole thing. And then I had it. So I kind of was thinking, well, this is a lot of, I started listening to it, and there's a lot of stuff I'd forgotten about, a lot of things that surprised me that I, the typical thing where you hear things back and think, why did I leave that song off the album? And what about that one? I forgot all about that. And that's when I got in touch with Pat, and we started talking about the idea. And Pat had the idea. He said, look, at first we said we could do it by email, we could do it over the phone, we could, whatever. And Beth said, look, when's the next time you're going to be in LA? Let's do it in person. I said, great. So I came out to LA. I think I came out just for that, Pat. I think I came out specifically for that.
You did.
And even though at the time my mother was living in LA, normally I might stay with her. I said, you know what, I'm gonna get a room at the Sportsman's Lodge in Studio City, because that's like, the perfect throwback, character-driven kind of place. I'm gonna hole up there for a few days, and we're gonna do like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. and just listen to this stuff. And Pat and I listened to everything, and Pat, in his very much Pat Thomas kind of way, was brutally honest and said, "That's great. That's terrible. We're going to use that. No way. Stop right. You can stop right now." And some things we listened for like maybe 10 seconds, and Pat would say, "Nope, next."
Riding against the minutes, outside the city limits, burning deep inside me like Death Valley rain. Death Valley rain.
Yeah,
Well-
I told Steve we were running it like the Gong Show, right? Seriously, I mean, it was just sort of, I wanted to be just instinctful. If we had to convince ourselves that it was good, then it probably was not good.
Well,
Going back a little further, how did Pat Thomas become the Steve Wynn patron saint? Like, you guys go way back.
We
Pat
do.
is always executive producing reissues. And how did you guys meet, and how did that relationship come to be?
Pat, try that one.
Okay, well, someone turned me on to college radio in 1983. I didn't really know what it was. And so I started listening to college radio in Rochester, New York. And I heard this song that sounded a lot like the Velvet Underground. I didn't know who it was. A buddy of mine came over to my apartment a few hours later. I said, "Dude, I heard this song sound like Velvet Underground." He goes, "It's got to be the Dream Syndicate." So the next day he brings over the 4-song Green EP.
Mhm.
And, before this, I was, like most of us, Mr. Classic Rock, right? Who, Stones, Beatles, Zeppelin, punk sort of passed me by, except for maybe the Clash, Talking Heads, etc. So the Dreams were really my first indie rock band, right? Then I got the Days of Wine and Roses, and I just sort of became obsessed with Steve. And in fact, by this point, I had this band Absolute Gray, and we played with the Long Riders, and I was picking Sid Griffin's mind, tell me what Steve Wynn is like. I met Steve.
Sure, you love that.
I met Steve very briefly backstage in 1984. That they Dream Syndicate were opening for REM in Rochester. I showed up early, kind of crashed. Steve said hello to me. We talked, blah blah blah. It was actually the following year, July '85. My band opens up for Steve. The Dream Syndicate had broken up and reformed with Paul Cutler. By this time, Steve was quite familiar with my fandom. And I just found the tape. We spent a day in a hotel room talking. Van Morrison,
Really?
whatever. And I taped it.
Wow. Wow. It wasn't an interview. We just was just a conversation. We
Kind
taped it.
of an interview, but
Okay.
just kind of us like getting to know each other, And then I happened to move to Denmark in 1986. The Dream Syndicate got very popular in Denmark. We wound up hanging out there. The next thing I know, we were trading phone numbers. And so Steve might not remember this. Steve started calling me out of the blue, like, "Hey, dude, what's going on? What are you working on?" This is like summer of '87. And then at some point, being the candid guy that I am, especially once Steve's solo career started, Steve would go, "Hey, I'm sending you my new album. What do you think?" And I often heard it a month or two before anyone else did. And I'd be like, "Dude, you've already written this song. We know the song. Already. You've written it 3 times." Right? Or,
I
"My
appreciate
God,
that.
fucking genius."
Obviously. Yeah.
And so by the time, let's say, Gutterball rolled around and My Midnight, in fact, I think I get a production assistance credit on My Midnight, because despite the amount of advice I give Steve, it doesn't mean he's going to listen to me, but he takes me seriously. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to take credit for any particular album, other than Steve will go, sounds interesting.
I know they say it's over with the night. Anyway, we fight and we never get it right. Cats and dogs, cats and dogs, cats and dogs, cats and dogs.
And, I think Steve said this in a few interviews, because when I tell him something's crappy, he knows if I say something's great, I really, really mean it.
Mhm.
Yeah, you have the combination. You've always been very honest with me, but also you are a musician and a writer and a music archivist, and that's all good perspective on these kinds of things. And I mean, I remember making ghost stories in Berkeley, working on at Fantasy Records, and hanging out with you a lot then too. And that was a difficult process. That one, some of that.
I was the first person to hear that album because you guys were still in the studio. You had a cassette, and I came to your hotel room. We sat there and we listened to the whole thing.
I like these hotel room visits. That should be the next box set.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
I know.
We're leaving out the Coke and the
Ronnie, until this year, I spend most of my time in hotel rooms.
Right, that's a good point. Good point.
as have you over the years.
If you want to talk to Steve, yeah, you go to a hotel room. That's
While going through the box, and I guess this is directed to both of you, was there ever an instance where you heard a certain demo or track and you thought, wow, I like the sound of or the feel of that more than the version that ended up on the album?
I'm trying to think that came specifically. I mean, there are. I don't know if we said that at any point of the listening part of it, but there are a few cases. It's hard to say. I'm thinking about that as you asked that. I mean, a lot of what's on this record, there are two things. Or some of them are a lot of the box set consists of my home demos, and I've always been a real big home demo freak. I mean, going back, look, there they are. Going back to even before the Dream Syndicate, in 80, 81, I bought a TX 3340 reel-to-reel four-track recorder that I was obsessed with. I record a lot of things. A lot of the version of That's What You Always Say, the predated the Dream Syndicate, has 15 minutes. So some people might know. There's been a bonus track on some of the records. That was recorded me playing everything on the TX 4-track. So I kind of learned it was fun. I think a lot of my motivation as a songwriter has often been because I like working with gear, recording gear. So I'll get a new piece of gear and I'll fool around with it. In the course of fooling around with it, I get a song. So to answer, I think a lot of the versions on the box set are songs that were written with me goofing around with sounds. And some of those impulsive, whimsical experimentation side of what I do would get sanded down or lost once the band played it. Not
Right.
I'm not saying it was worse or better, but the demos tend to be just more loopy, more goofy, more just whimsical is the best word I can say for it. So there's some versions on here that, yeah, God, I kind of like what I was going after there.
Shelly, can't you understand? I only want to be your friend. Shelly, can I say it again? I really want to be your friend.
Was the initial plan only to cover this period, 1995 to 2005, or was there an issue maybe with licensing of the? Okay.
Yeah, this is a very specific period because it's a period when I first moved from Los Angeles to New York. I moved from LA to New York in '94, and a lot of things happened then. But the main thing that happened for various reasons I talk about in the liner notes is New York was very inspiring. I just, in the period of '95 to 2005, wrote more songs, made more records, did more home recording, studio recording, more touring, more of everything than I did before or since. It just was just really the kind of thing you dream of if you're a writer or musician, where you're just, man, I can't stop. I'm just on, I want to get it all down while I can. So this kind of documents that. And I think a lot of it came, a few things. Like I say, moving to New York was exciting for me. I always loved New York City a lot. And I wanted to live here since I was a teenager, and being in a place where I could stay out till 4 a.m. and talk to people in bars and walk 8 miles after closing down a bar. And all of that was so inspiring. On top of that, when I went solo after the Dream Syndicate, I made a handful of records on Kerosene Man, which you talked about, Dazzling Display, and Fluorescent, which were all records I liked quite a bit, but they were records where I said, okay, I don't want to make Dream Syndicate records. I want to make different, I want to do the kind of music I couldn't do with the Dream Syndicate. So I'm going to do pop records with many people on the track. I'm going to do folk records. I'm going to do acoustic records. Starting with this box set with Melting in the Dark, a record I made in Boston with the band Come, was where I said, okay, this is what I do. I make guitar music, 2 guitars and bass and drums, and noisy and cathartic. and I kind of re-embraced that side of what I do. And that really is what you hear on this whole box set, is kind of my rock side. Strangely enough, this box set ends with a record called Tick, 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 the last record I made of the Desert Trilogy, 3 records I made in Tucson with the Miracle 3, the backing band I played with for a while. And that's the end of the box set. Strangely enough, or maybe fittingly enough, the next music I made after Where Decade Ends was kind of returned to a folky, poppy, orchestrated kind of record. So, I mean, a lot of what I've always done is reacting to what I did before. And the Decade box is a reaction to the Dream Syndicate.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And now there's nothing left. Ooh, black magic coming down on me. Yeah, black magic. So blind that I can't see anymore.
These recordings stretch back 25 years, and yet it all today sounds remarkably fresh and timeless. Was that something that you noticed while putting the box together?
Oh, I think so. Pat, do you
Yeah. I
find
mean,
him here?
I was just going to say that I think this is the decade, no pun intended, where Steve finds his own voice as a solo artist. In other words, Kerosene Man is kind of a little bit of a commercial rock record in some ways. Dazzling Display was sort of Steve's experimental record. Fluorescent is a personal favorite of mine. It's almost like his more singer-songwriter type. But this is like, when you think of Steve Wynn, if you're a fan and you've seen him live a million times like I have, this is it right here. Like, you know, to me, this is kind of like when Mick Taylor joins the Stones. That's, to me, when they truly find in my mind, their voice as an album band. Right? And this is Steve finding his voice as a solo act. You know, I mean, this is the bulk of his solo catalog. You know, I mean, one thing, like, you know, an album like Sweetness and Light, when it came out, I'll be honest, I didn't play it very often. But then when I'm listening back to it all these years later, I'm like, God, there's like 6 or 7 Steve Wynn standards on here I've heard a million times on stage that I forgot were from that album. You know, like this.
I have a funny story about that. That's funny because
and so you know, obviously there's many sides of Steve. There's the baseball project, there's Gutterball, but you know, if someone was to say to me, "Who the hell was Steve Wynn as a solo act?" I'd go,
"Yeah,
yes,
absolutely."
You know?
Sweetness and Light, which I've been very honest about this over the years. After I made Melting in the Dark in Boston, Chris and Talia from Come backed me on the following tour with Dennis Duck and Armstead Welford, but they could only do that tour and they had to go back to being the band they were doing. So I had to put a band together quickly, and I found a drummer who I met on tour named Linda Pittman, and I asked Linda if she would be up for going on the following tour. Great drummer, you know, and we got along really well. She did, and that began our relationship, and eventually now we're married. So Sweetness and Light really was, to be honest, a lot of the motivation for that record was just to get in the studio, make a record as soon as possible with Linda, so I could go back on tour with Linda, playing on songs we recorded together. I mean, that was really, you know, besides just the normal motivation of I'm going to write good songs, I'm going to find a good band. There was all that, but actually the main motivation was I want to get back on tour with my new girlfriend. I kind of at the time thought that record might have been rushed, and it wasn't maybe as good as some of the other ones, and there's, you know, just various things stuck in my craw. And like Pat, over time I've really come back to actually thinking the record's actually very, not only, I think it's a great sounding and has a cool record and some songs I play all the time now, but I did at the time, I think maybe on the promo tour for My Midnight, I did an interview with an Atlanta newspaper. I think it was Creative Loafing. And I think that was it. And I did an interview with them where I kind of bagged on that record. I said, you know, I bagged on myself. I said, they're not my best songs. I kind of think it was not my best record because I kind of rushed it, blah, blah, blah. Well, I didn't know when that record came out, John Agnello, who mixed the record, and it was that was the record where we began working together. And he and I worked together on most of the records in this box set. He was in Atlanta making a record. And John had just finished a session with the band he was working with. and ran into that article. I got a call 6 a.m. from a very drunk John Aniello at the airport in Atlanta saying, "How could you say that? That's a great record. I can't believe he went on. I didn't pick up the phone, by the way, at 6 a.m. John going off on me, just saying, "Well, I can't believe you said that. We made a great record together." And John was right.
The sun is shining, breaking the clouds that block the way. A silver lining, well, look at that. The sun is shining, breaking the clouds that block the way. A silver lining, well, look at that.
Be honest here. When you were, writing those songs for that album, and you were, maybe rehearsing them with her, were you kind of feeding off the vibe to see, like, yeah, does she dig this one? Does she dig this one?
Yeah, were you trying to impress Linda with the songs on the record?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess so. Probably. I mean, I think I'm always trying to look. Any songwriter who plays in a band knows that the hardest thing in the world is when you bring a song to the band, because you're vulnerable and you're nervous, and we've all been in bands. We know that there's that thing where you play the song and your bandmates don't say anything for the first 5 seconds. You think, oh, they hate it. Oh no. Oh no. You want something right away. So yeah, there's that with any music buddy I play with, but with Linda for sure. There's a song on the box set called "In Your Prime." I think there's two versions. There's a demo version with the band and then a studio version. And I know that one, for example, she was off at work, and I just wanted to write a song to play her when she came home from work that she would like. I mean, that was really why I wrote that song. Like, what would Linda want to hear when she came home from work? And I think that song is kind of a little bit in the vein of the first Belle and Sebastian record, which Linda loved at the time. So I was like, well, I'm going to write her a Belle and Sebastian song. She'll love that.
Oh, you look so beautiful. Oh, you look so radiant. Oh, you look resplendent in your element and in your prime. Oh, you look so dangerous, so obvious and so elusive, like a falling comet in your prime. Think of all.
Were there songs that you wanted to include that, Steve was like, no, we're not going to put that on? Or were there songs that Steve wanted to include that you were said, no, I don't think that should go on there?
Steve really gave me carte blanche, I mean, I think I might say this in the liner notes. Like, I mean, ultimately he could pull rank, but I kind of had the initial final say. There were a few songs that Steve later, like once the dust had settled, Steve came to me and he said, look, here's 3 or 4 songs. I can't remember what they were. Let's put them in. And I think I put all of those in, but like one where I just said, dude, no, not happening. I honestly can't tell you what it was. But I just love the fact that Steve kind of let me do my thing. Now, the one thing someone asked me this the other day, there's only really one live song on here. It's actually a radio session. It's Follow Me with Come. And, I had this fantasy early on in the hotel room, because we obviously had some live material in that big mix. But, if we had started to include live songs, this would be like a 40 CD box, right?
Yeah.
So it just didn't make sense to go down that rabbit hole. I will say that I have this fantasy, which is Steve very briefly had Rich Gilbert in the band as the guitar player. And so the band came to San Francisco. I can't remember what year this is. And it's Armstead on bass, Rich on guitar. And I brought in a 16-track ADAT and basically recorded a live album for fun. And Steve and I at that moment briefly toyed with maybe trying to squeeze it out somehow. And then Richard already left the band. And Steve said, well, this isn't the band anymore. But I'm hoping that this archive series will be the chance for me to finally put that out 20 years later. Because Rich in the band is a very narrow window, but he's playing like a mofo. And maybe we'll do some other live shit someday. But that's kind of in the back of my mind, is to get that out.
Forgot about that.
It was also one of those weird gigs where like nobody really showed up for whatever reason. It was like a Tuesday night, but nevertheless, you guys played your ass off, and we had a tape recorder, right? I mean, classic moment where you capture the thin gig yet a great gig.
that was a great band that didn't last that long. And again, the case where Rich had other things to do. I mean, I was,
Yeah.
Going solo, what I wanted to do when I broke up the Dream Syndicate, when we broke up. I didn't break it up, we broke up. But going solo, it's kind of fantasy land because you can play with anybody, but at the same time, you're also, no matter how much the person you're playing with likes what you do, they're hired guns. So when they got something else to do, I gotta go now. I got someplace to be.
I don't know what happened, what went wrong, or if I even care. Burn out in a fire, fall or drown in oceans of despair. Now I try my best to draw a line to hear back from a better time. I lose myself in words and rhymes.
This box is a testament to you being able to assemble different musicians that work, Steve. I mean, almost every record is a different, until the Miracle 3, it is a different lineup of musicians. So it's a testament to that. Yeah.
I told Steve that he's sort of the John Mayall of indie rock, right? Because first he brings us Carl Procota, amazing. Then he brings us Paul Cutler, amazing. Then he brings us Jason Victor, amazing, right? And other guys, like Steve obviously has had fantastic foils on guitar and other instruments too, of course.
Yeah,
Well,
Kirk Swan. Yeah.
Kirk Swan. I mean, when I went, starting with my solo records, I was a solo artist. It's my name on the record, but I've never approached being solo as being the the boss, the Svengali. For Pat, I'll use the Van Morrison thing where you're out there and he's Van Morrison being almost like James Brown type, where they're working for him and they better be right on it. My thing is, once I'm even on a solo record, I'm in a band. When I play with with Rich Gilbert, Armstead Welford, and Linda Pittman, I'm in that band. When I play with Come, I'm in that band. I'm just part of the band. I might be, have the final say, maybe a touch more on a solo record than I would do in a Dream Syndicate record, but same process.
You should be careful of what you leave behind. I wish you the best, but the devil's not that kind.
Each of the albums definitely have their own personalities. They have separate moods, but they all seem to come from the same place. I mean, I'd say maybe right now My Midnight is my favorite, but it's not always been my favorite.
Very wise man.
But when you approach each album, did you write them differently, or did you want to create something different with each release, or was that how it worked out organically?
That's a good question. I think a lot of times when I've made records over the years, I've written songs for the record. Like Melting in the Dark, I wrote the songs to record with Come. I was a fan of their music, and I kind of knew a little bit what, at least I didn't know him that well. I knew Talia Zedek kind of well, but I had in my mind an idea of who they were and what they were like. And I wrote almost like writing a screenplay for an actor. I thought this is going to be a Come record. But I will say after that, once I had made that record, I was just writing so much, I wasn't writing for records. I was just writing all the time. And that's not always the case. Like these days with the Dream Syndicate, I wrote the songs for these times to be on these times. Same thing with How That I Was Here. Crossing Dragon Bridge, the record I wrote to record in Slovenia with Chris Ekman. These songs, as you can tell from the demos, I was just cranking things out. And then when it came time to go in the studio, for example, Here Come the Miracles, which is personally, I think, my favorite record I've ever made. I really like that one a lot. And this is a record where just everything worked really well. But I had about 40 or 50 songs stockpiled for that record. And I was sending my demos, a lot of which were on the box, regularly to playing for Linda, sending them to Chris Brokaw, saying to Chris Kakovich, saying, I don't know, which do you like? Really, there was just a lot of material, and some songs would show up 2 records later. So it kind of a different way in the way it worked before or since.
Standing by the riverside, waiting for the tide to rise.
Well, how did Real Gun Music get involved with putting out the box set?
Basically, I am like a freelance reissue producer. I've done stuff for Omnivore. I've done a lot of stuff
Mhm.
for like in the Attic. I currently do a lot of work for Fire Records out of the UK, and I knew that Gordon was a fan, and I knew that Gordon was willing, after discussions, to kind of lay out the money and the time and energy it would take to do the box, and I kind of demanded, and he agreed to do it, this way, right, with the little, I call these sort of the Japanese mini
Yeah.
LP
Mhm.
cardboard sleeves, but
Mhm.
um,
Nice.
and I just felt like Gordon was the right guy. He was willing to meet demands, not that they were crazy. We wanted all the brown
Mhm.
M&Ms taken out.
Yeah.
In the studio, he was willing to do that.
Yeah. And we spent, 2 years working on this and really put a lot of effort in this. And a lot of, I'm very proud of the fact that both Pat and I, and Linda as well, because Linda was very involved, and she did all the photos for the package and helped with a lot of it helped me with the liner notes I wrote and things like that. And all of us put in so much time, and it would have been frustrating to have put it out on a label where they did it cheaply or cut corners. I say Gordon really, Real Gone definitely did everything right. And the day I got the box set in the mail, by the way, Stephen, I loved your unboxing video. That just made my
thank you.
morning when I saw that. But when I had that same experience you were showing, when I opened it up for the first time in the mail and looked at it, I had a nervousness because I think about things like Pat was talking about the Japanese style sleeves, and I opened it and I was just fearing, oh, what if the book was cheap paper, or what the box is, falling apart. Everything is really,
Yeah.
great quality. Everything in here, the way the digipacks fold out, the way the little mini albums, the whole thing is just great. It was made me
No,
very happy.
That brings up another point I noticed going through the box is, Steve, your ability to get a record deal. I mean, a lot of these, there's a lot of labels involved in that decade. You know what I mean? But
Mhm. Yes.
you always landed on your feet somewhere, and that's not easy to do.
I've had, the Dream Syndicate made 4 albums for 4 labels, so that was really a while. I feel like I've settled down a little bit since then. With 3 of the records on here came out on a label called 0 Hour that was kind of in the grunge indie rock boom of the mid '90s, where they kind of got fed a bunch of money and this stuff. So I was with them for a while, and then made a bunch. The one thing I thought about the other day was, you're right, they're Interstate did one of the records, and but they were all released, except for Melting in the Dark, they were all released on the same label in Europe, Blue Rose
Mhm.
Records
Oh.
in Germany. And a lot of these years, even though I'm living in New York, even though I'm working with American musicians and American studios, I'd say during a lot of these years, Blue Rose was essentially my label. That was really where I would go first to talk about release dates and how we're going to do it and when I'm going to tour, because that was still is my biggest market. That's where fortunately over the years, I would say when I started where this box set begins, I was almost like an expat. When I was doing Melt in the Dark and Fluorescent, I couldn't get a gig in the States. It was a weird time. So I was playing entirely in Europe. And fortunately, over the course of time since then, I can play the States a lot. But really, Rose was, I got to hand to Edgar Heckman of Blue Rose. He had a lot to do with all these records coming out.
I fall down easy, but I get up slow. I really, really hope that the bruises don't show. If I came to you late at night, would you answer to my call? I can't do anything to make it all right. This is how you learn to fall. This is how you learn to fall.
Europe seems to really love American music a lot more than Americans do, and I mean, seriously, you think of all these
Great
great,
history.
you think of all this great music that has come out here over the decades, going back to the 40s and 50s. You can find a Bear Family box set of Stonewall Jackson, yet you can barely find a single 12-track best of here in the States. So
Yeah.
those
Family.
Europeans
Love
have
them.
good. Yeah, I know, me too.
Yeah.
But
Have good
anyway,
taste. Yeah.
what is next for Steve Wynn?
Well, my last handful of years have been primarily tied up in the Dream Syndicate, which has been great and been very exciting. but this box set made me realize I haven't done a solo record in 10 years. And
Wow.
so of new material
Mhm.
in the studio with the band. So I'm due for that. I wouldn't know when the pandemic has passed, I can record in studios with people. I'd love to do a new solo record. Everything else is still on the table. I'm still in the baseball project. We're going to make a new record. We were going to do it this year. It'll be next year. And Dream Syndicate will still be active. But I really kind of got the mood to get back and do a big kaleidoscopic, wild, panoramic, impulsive solo record.
Let me come across the table.
Please you now.
Let me take you for a stroll.
I don't deserve you now.
Let me try to be the one.
Who always lets you down.
Let me take you down. We've been hanging out. We've been hanging out. We've been hanging out.
Well, how do viewers learn more about the box and Steve Wynn? Do you want to head them to a Facebook page or a website?
Well, sure. I mean, my Facebook is facebook.com/Steve Wynn. So that's easy. SteveWynn.net is my website. On Instagram, Cult Artist,
Yeah.
which is, yeah. I'm easily found on all the platforms. and I'm also pretty responsive. So people, want to write, I answer questions. And I'm these days doing a lot of gigs, web gigs, and it's been a lot of fun. So there are things out there people want to find me for sure. But a good
Well,
starting place is probably my website, stevewynn.net.
Well, I think all three of you, Mr. Steve Wynn, the actually over here, the legend that is Steve Wynn, who all of us have adored for nearly 40 years. But I appreciate everything that you've done, Steve. I appreciate your hard work on this, Pat, and I appreciate you, Ronnie. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Remember to check out Steve WYNN-DECADE, now available on Real Gone Music. Thank you, gentlemen, and please
Hey,
stay
thank you.
safe and be well.